This is the Chucktown Wind Report Extended Outlook from Friday, August the 21st through Monday, August the 24th. We have quite a bit to talk about with not only our local weather, but we also have the tropics, which are becoming more and more active as you get later into August and into September. But first, let's go ahead and talk about the Chucktown Wind Report. And what we have right now is we have this high pressure here over Florida. Whoops, let me circle it this way. Surface high pressure is located here right about now, but the mid-level high pressure is really over the northeast Gulf of Mexico. And what that's doing is it's providing a westerly flow aloft, even sort of a northwesterly flow, coupling with those land breezes overnight as the land has cooled and the ocean temperatures are warmer than the land. So that's what triggers these land breezes to actually bend a little bit more northwest versus west. We do have a cold front that is dropping down into the region with high pressure building in behind it. And this high pressure is only 1,016 millibars, but we are expected to see a separate lobe of high pressure develop up here, where more of the concentration of that high pressure center is going to be up in this area. And the 1016 millibar will likely build to about 1020 in this area with central high pressure. And as this cold front, it looks more diagonal this morning. It's rather dry. It's fairly weak, pinched in between two almost moderate high pressures, and it's keeping it rather dry. As we get into Saturday and Sunday, some of that moisture will stream along this frontal boundary up from the Gulf, and we'll probably get some shower activity and rain, increasing chances of rain along this area, possibly into Sunday as these high pressures sort of wobble apart from each other. But for right now, this frontal boundary is probably going to look something more like this as we get into later today. It's going to turn more into a sagging high pressure as this lobe of high pressure develops up here to the northeast, where that center will concentrate its efforts. So the Gulf of Mexico high pressure will remain to the south, high pressure to the northeast. Cold front boundary draped in between, rather weak to start. That doesn't mean we won't see a couple of rains or maybe possible storms, but for right now it looks rather dry over the entire state of South Carolina. I don't think we're going to get a whole lot. This isn't going to be a big rainmaker. It's going to pass through relatively quick, and we actually are likely to see a fairly strong shot of northeast to east-northeast winds tomorrow. The models aren't really picking up on that yet, but as we've seen in the past where these frontal boundaries actually go south of here, we have this coastal troughing, which is you can clearly see on the visible right here, as this frontal boundary kind of does like this, and the high pressure builds down from the northeast, we actually get more of an east-northeast bend along our coastline. So that might be something to look at for tomorrow. The models, I think, are starting to come up just a little bit to low teens. But if that does build to about 1,000 or 1,022 millibars up in this direction, we could see mid to upper teens build down along our coast tomorrow. And like I said, the models just aren't picking it up yet. That's something that we have to know about just from our microclimate. So this will be the area to watch. Charleston in particular does have some really favorable acceleration area for these east-northeast winds to really build. I'm thinking we could see 14 to 18 knots, and there's a question of how strong that high pressure builds from the north, and if we can even get into the upper teens to near 20 knots. It is possible. The last round that we had was 1,020 millibars, and we did get to about 18, 19 knots at Folly Beach. Folly Beach did carry the higher numbers. Sometimes north of the harbor carries the higher numbers, so we'll have to see how this one plays out. But for right now, we're going to see sort of a weak pattern today. We'll probably see those westerlies burn off, and then we'll get a very light southerly flow. Now, it could be a mixed variable southerly flow because this frontal boundary is going to be so close to the coastline later in the afternoon that by the time these southerlies start coming in, everything's just going to be weakened. There isn't a very strong ridge of high pressure out in the Atlantic, and that's due in part by this little guy, or I'm sorry, I should say this large guy out here, and we'll get to him in just a minute. But this upper level low, actually surface to mid to upper level low, is really kind of keeping any kind of high pressure built in the Atlantic down. So we don't have much going in the way of sea breezes. We'll get mild sea breezes today, and then we'll see that east-northeast wind turn on tomorrow behind this front. And as we get into Sunday, this high pressure broadens. These two join. So we sort of get a ridge built up and down the coastline, and then we see a weaker pattern. And then Monday we start to possibly see a better build of southerlies as this low sort of tracks off to the north and then swoops out into the Atlantic. This is a very slow mover according to the National Hurricane Center. So, but we shouldn't expect anything moderate to build on sea breezes until this large broad low is out of the way and we can get high pressure building back in from the east. So let's go ahead and look at our local data scope from WeatherFlow. And we're looking at 9 knots in the harbor along the open area where land shadowing doesn't take effect to this area over the water. The beaches are seeing significantly less knottage because of that. Folly Beach Pier, 1 knot from the northwest, and that's also from land shadowing as well. And the models, I went ahead and ran the models for this morning, and it looks like we should see this westerly flow last for a little while, especially just below that boundary. That tends to create sort of a zonal flow that keeps that westerly flow going, and these models are saying that it's going to burn off by midday. Well, this westerly flow could actually become a little bit more aggressive below that boundary and actually get possibly even into the low teens at times. By late morning when the sun's coming up, you have a little bit of a temperature gradient there between the ocean and the land, and until those temperatures equalize and balance and then the land actually becomes higher than the ocean, we won't see those southerlies turn. But below a boundary, sometimes we get a little bit of a jet below, and we can see those westerly winds last a little bit longer into early afternoon. So I don't think that the rebound of the southerlies is going to be anything really, it's probably not going to get anywhere past 10 knots. We could see something very late afternoon near 10 knots to low teens, but with a south-southeast flow off of the high-resolution rapid refresh model, if that's going to be the trend on southeasterlies, then yes, we'll definitely stay weaker. Okay, so if we look at the earth.nullschool.net, let's take a quick peek, and you can see these westerlies on the surface on the surface map. The little green circles where we are, you can see that little bit of a bend from the southwest just ahead of the boundary, and then it goes west off the land breezing all the way out to sea. And you can see where the Gulf surface high pressure is, and you'll see as we go up that the mid-level high pressure is actually more centralized over that area versus over Florida where the other surface map was showing. And right here, you can see it right here in the Northeast Gulf. So a lot of times these Northeast Gulf highs get hung in here due to heat fluxing in this area, and it just provides this westerly flow below these boundaries that come dropping down into the southeast region. And if we go a little bit higher up, we can see that the upper ridge of high pressure is actually over this area of Florida, and this is what's going to keep that frontal boundary from actually pressing all the way through the coast diagonally. That's why it's going to have a little bit of that sagging feature where it sort of bends in a direction. Let me turn on the editing tool. And that's why we'll see this frontal boundary sort of shape like this, where that high pressure just keeps it blocked from the south, and that's probably going to be the norm for that one. But we can see this upper level low over here. This is actually circled by the National Hurricane Center. It's a surface, mid, and upper level low all at one time. It's over cooler water, so it's probably going to take on more of a subtropical characteristic over time. There's your mid-level, and then we even go to the surface level, and you can see the surface rotation is actually down here, whereas the mid and upper levels are above it. And that's typical of a subtropical storm where you have a displaced mid-upper level low pressure from the center. And if we go to the National Hurricane Center, this is showing a 20% chance of formation in the next 48 hours and a 60% chance in 5 days. This area of disturbance is likely going to be a very slow organization. It probably, like I said, subtropical characteristics involve a cold core over cooler water, a broader wind field. It's going to have time to spin out there, so some of these effects may reach the Outer Banks and even southeast North Carolina. If we look at the infrared loop, the center is actually in this area right here where most of the thunderstorm activity and shower activity is off to the east and southeast of the center of rotation. But if we look at the broadness on the water vapor loop, you can see how wide the wind field is. It's actually rather large, and if this little area drifts, the further over to the west it drifts, the more effect it's going to have along the east coast of North Carolina and possibly even Virginia, just from its wind field alone. Any kind of frontal activity trying to pass through this area may get blocked and hung up along the coastline. So we'll just keep an eye on that. Okay, let's take a look at Danny. Danny is sustaining winds of 85 miles an hour, movement is very slow, 10 miles an hour to the west-northwest, and the track has it heading straight across the northern Leeward Islands and right into Puerto Rico and on into the Dominican Republic and Haiti. That's just based on the most recent models. That's not definite. So we always have to keep an eye on some of the other factors that change the paths of these storms. So for right now, it keeps it at hurricane status at least until Sunday, and then we start to see a weakening pattern. So if we look at the water vapor loop, you can see Danny right here is very small, very compact storm. And this kind of puts it into perspective of how small this storm really is. Now, you see all this dry air in this area ahead of it, and I'll go ahead and circle. All this air is very dry ahead. He has quite a battle to go, and he's really encountering a lot of tough obstacles ahead because we have some wind shear coming up from the southwest and then all this dry air ahead. But sometimes these little storms, these compact storms, have a better, they sort of have a better chance of weathering this type of environment versus some of the larger storms that suck the dry air all the way into the center and then sort of disperse and weaken all the way down. Well, Danny is actually holding very well. He's still drawing some moisture up from the intertropical convergence zone just north of South America. So he's got a feeder band coming up from the south. He's not all alone out there. He does have some sort of fueling mechanism going on that should help him hold together for a little bit longer. Now, if we look at our data scope from WeatherFlow Track, we can see them on satellite. Some of the buoy readings are carrying 19 knots from behind over here, and as we go into the future, we see with the last hurricane status that we have for the track will be on Saturday and down to 75 miles an hour, and then we're expecting some weakening to go down to 70 miles an hour, tropical storm. And then by the time it reaches the leewards, we're looking at 60 miles an hour. So a very slow downward trend is expected with Danny. And then as he gets over these islands, over this land and some of these mountainous areas, especially Puerto Rico and now and over into Dominican Republic, if this track holds, he will weaken even further. Now from there, the models start to get a little bit squirrely on where he's going to go. And you can see how compact he is right now. And you can see an eye has developed over the last 24 hours as he's remaining very compact. You can see that moisture sort of streaming up from this area, this blob of moisture down here. Danny is able to keep a steady band going. Now, if we look at the rainbow color imagery, you can get a better idea of where the eye is. It's actually a little bit more well developed this morning as we head into the day, and we'll see how he does. Track guidance. Here we have general westerly flow, west-northwesterly flow over these islands. Most of the models are in agreement for this track, which heads directly over Puerto Rico. And then beyond Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, if he holds together, this area up here in the Bahamas is actually a more favorable environment as of right now. If he's able to make it and the environment holds favorable, we could see some redevelopment there. I don't think he's peaked out yet unless he gets torn apart by the island. So we'll have to see where he goes. It's just very unsure once he gets to this area of the Dominican Republic of where that track is going to be. We have to take this storm really day to day because there's so many factors in the atmosphere that are sort of molding his track into different areas. Now here's the model intensity guidance, and you can see most of the models are in agreement with a weakening phase over the next 132 hours. And that's in part by, of course, making landfall and hitting mountainous areas where it tends to weaken the storms. So let's take a look at the water, precipitable water ahead of them, and you can see the spin right here over about 45 degrees longitude, 45 to almost 50 degrees longitude, and you can see these bands of moisture that he's still pulling in. It's very tightly wound, very small storm. And if we look at the Saharan air layer, this is the dust that's coming off of Africa. This is at the mid-levels. This orange dust that you see on this map really sort of helps to tear most of the storms that we see coming off of Africa. It helps tear them apart because it provides dry air that wraps into the center, does not allow for vertical stacking or thunderstorm activity to really build around a focused center of activity. But you can see Danny down here to the south. You can see kind of the battle he has ahead because there's still some modest to moderate dust ahead in the mid-levels that he's been working through quite a bit already. But with that upper level shear coming up from the southwest, and let me go back to that, see if we can get that back on. Right, Okay, so this area right down here, and you can see Danny kind of edging into the eastern side of the screen down here, this upper level shear area right here is about 25 to 30 knots, and that might help to stave off some of these cloud tops just a little bit further. This will be the first phase of weakening, and then the drier air, and then the land. So we have three different things that are working against him as far as strengthening goes. It'll be a steady downhill or uphill battle for him, but a downhill sort of weakening phase. So that's the Saharan dust level. Back to our local. Go back to our local map. Okay, so let's just do a recap real quick for today for our winds. For today we have a weak southerly flow developing in the afternoon after we see these westerlies burn off. I don't think we're going to get past 10 knots. As we get into tomorrow, we're going to look at this high pressure. East-northeast winds, I'm going to call 14 to 18 knots. I think we have a pretty good shot at that. It may start out northerly and bend northeast and then east-northeast as the land heats up, and that backdoor sea breezing effect occurs along our coastline. As we get into Sunday, we see that high pressure sort of drift out into the Atlantic. We see that what was that easterly flow sort of become more of a southeasterly flow, weak, I'd say somewhere at or below 10 knots again, and then we don't really get back into our southerlies until that high pressure builds back out in the Atlantic as it goes out and over, and then that will provide more of our southerly flow up the coastline. So that's what we're looking for. We think Monday, I believe we might see low teens and possible mid-teens if we can get that Atlantic high back on track and this broad area of low pressure out of the way. And that will do it for the Chucktown Wind Report. Thank you.